Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Silver Years. My name is DK, and I'm very happy to be here, and I humbly thank you for joining me. Today is a new segment of My Story Time. My Story Time is where I tell my story as a way to counter the ever changing official narrative of history, his story. Because no one, not even AI, can tell my life story as a direct reflection of the times in which I lived better than me. And this is where I'm telling it. Now, the story that will be told today is part two and a continuation from the previous story, my story time top post titled part one. This is not a standalone video, and watching part one is required viewing in order to understand this video and to not take things out of context or make incorrect assumptions, which is important. A link to part one is in the description box, and I'll include it above here as well. That being said, this continuation takes place between around 1973 to 1974 in Huntington Beach, California, when I was a young teenager. As I mentioned in part one, this is about how I met my first husband, how it came about, and how it came together. But there is a lot to unpack here, and it'll probably require a part three or more. I'm not sure yet. I guess we'll see. Now, I said this in part one, and I'll say it here again. I've realized that it's time to tell this old story as I experienced it and clear up any misunderstandings if they exist for those impacted. It is also time to give energetic closure to these old stories. Closure offers healing, and you need to reveal to heal. These are things I have rarely spoken about in 50 years, but for whatever reason, I feel compelled to speak my truth now as I experienced it as best I can, warts and all. And by the way, me telling my story from my perspective is in no way meant to disparage or attack anyone. This was my experience, period. Sweeping it under the rug with silence serves no purpose anymore except to perpetuate generational trauma, and I can no longer be complicit in that. Take it or leave it, it matters not to me, and it changes nothing. But if me telling this helps even one person, then it's all good. Right. So I ended part one where little Beta had taught me through experience the brutal lesson of what a spark plug does and what it looks like. I was about 14 years old when this happened, and he was about 19 years old. I was just beginning high school, and he had already graduated the year before. So now I'm going to offer up a little background on Little Beta because people's lives are more than just one event. There's always a backstory, and these stories matter when considering the whole. At the time of the lawnmower spark plug incident previously described in part one, little Beta was out of high school and working a job at a big yacht yard on Pacific Coast Highway in Newport Beach at the time, repairing and building yachts. It was a casual or more laid back job, and he worked it with several of his school buddies. A job where he could smoke weed and snort coke and whatever else while inhaling the pungent fumes from the epoxies required to work with the fiberglass materials used in repairing the boats. He only worked there for a year or two, I think, but his heavy drug use continued without my knowledge or awareness for several years afterward until he blew the septum in his nose, apparently. I knew nothing about that incident because it was kept secret from me. I only learned about it many years later from an old school friend who happened to be the one to drive him to the hospital when it happened, when the blood began to pour from his nose. And no, it wasn't Mama San. I was told by his family early on that he had been offered a full ride scholarship to a university in Alabama for wrestling in his senior year of high school. Although he was very short and small in stature, he was an exceptional athlete as well as being mechanically gifted. He had won state championships for his weight in wrestling and had a room full of trophies to prove it. He was not a team player, however, and never wanted his wins to depend on someone else, on the actions of a teammate. This is why he chose wrestling. It was a solo thing. But he had no interest in academia, and he had absolutely zero interest in going to Alabama for any reason. He rejected the scholarship before I even knew who he was. Little Beta came from what appeared to be an intact, loving family, very different from my family experience or what I was living, very different. And it was everything I was longing to be a part of on the surface. His father was a mechanical engineer who worked in aerospace for his entire career. And he was a devoted family man who loved his wife and worshiped his son. His father was a good man, and I still say that today. Was he perfect? No. But all in all, he was a good man at heart. His mother, well, I'm not sure how to describe her other than she had two sides. She had the ability to be loving and supportive when it suited her. But then again, she could be vindictive and venomous when that suited her. As long as she was getting what she wanted the way she wanted it, you saw the good side. She knew no bounds, though, when she had judged and rejected something or believed herself crossed, whether her assessments were true and correct or not. And she was incapable of balance or reason or forgiveness once she'd made up her mind. It took me a number of years to see the true depth of her vicious side with fully open eyes. Took me a while. Her son, little Beta, and her second daughter were mirrors of this, and that too took me a number of years to see with clarity. His mother had two daughters from two different fathers from two previous marriages. Young daughters that little Beta's father raised when he married her before they had little Beta together. What I always found interesting is that neither of the fathers of his sisters had any relationship or contact with their daughters during my 20 plus year connection with the family. It was as if they were deleted somehow, and that always seemed bizarre to me. I had a better understanding of why years later when I became the focus of her venom. His oldest sister was out of the house when I came into the picture, so my connection to her was very limited. And little Beta was forever critical of her lifestyle or her husband's or whatever other reason he could manufacture. She was simply not much of an influence on my experience with the family. Although she was always nice to me, and I never had a personal issue with her. And I still don't. I still don't. His second sister, on the other hand, was a piece of work. And over time, she created great problems, serious problems, devastating problems. She was codependent and had long term health issues that compounded what I can only identify as mental instability. She wasn't right in the head. And it took me to my mid 20s to begin to understand with some clarity that there was something really wrong with her. But upon meeting her, you'd never know it at first until you knew it because she put on a good front. Even her mental instability seemed innocent enough for a long, long time. She was living in the family home and continued to do so while passive aggressively interfering in ways she didn't belong for years to come. Well, for the rest of her life, actually. She never had any children of her own due to her health challenges, but she seemed to love and live for my children as their aunt, at the beginning at least. Little Beta's mother was a housewife, a domestic goddess. She was an excellent cook and she earned extra money through being a licensed daycare giver. She would only take on two or three children at a time, and she had an age limit from infancy to 2 or 3 years old. She had her schedule and her system down pat. And she really was a good caregiver in the age her age range of choice. And I learned a lot from her about how to care for my infant daughter after she was born. I took care of my sisters, but they weren't infants. So she taught me a lot about how to take care of her at the beginning. His mother was also illiterate. She was illiterate due to being diagnosed as being legally blind from cataracts when she was a child. She was never sent to school as a result, ever. At least this was the story I was told. But again, there were many things I wasn't told that seemed a little off, and you just kind of know it after a while. Anyway, she hid her illiteracy very well. Let me add here that she was in no way blind. I was shocked when I realized how well she could see years later, and I called her on it. And she just kind of gave me a look like, okay, busted. Her illiteracy made her completely dependent on little Beta's father for all things paperwork. And he was very caring and thorough when talking her through documents that she couldn't read, especially when she needed to sign them. Due to this legally blind and illiterate situation, she also never learned to drive and was fully dependent on others to transport her wherever she needed to go all of her life. She watched soap operas in the day while her daycare babies napped and was 100% talk show educated. In other words, she followed the world through people like Dinah Shore, Sally Jesse Raphael, Oprah, Phil Donahue, Geraldo Rivera, Good Morning America, and the guests they interviewed. As I mentioned, little Beta's mother knew how to cook, and his father loved being well fed by her. It was a classic case of winning his heart through his stomach. She was one of those cooks who could have next to nothing in the house and still manage to make a great meal. And over time, she did teach me how to cook. I learned very little from my mother when it came to cooking meals. It was little Beta's mother who taught me most of what I know. So, with this brief little backdrop of his familial influences, suffice to say, little Beta came from a family that adored him. He was the star in their world, and he had the trophies to prove it. Some might have even called him spoiled, and it was obvious that he could do no wrong. He was used to getting his own way, and when he had his mind set on something, he would not be dissuaded or let the rules get in the way. He was very competitive, and the rules applied to everyone but him because he was the exception. He made this abundantly clear to me on many occasions. His approach today would be called narcissistic, but that wasn't a word we knew in the 1970s. That wasn't a word they called my father either. I think they called them go getters back then. So, in this 1973 1974 time frame, little Beta had his sights set on me, even though I had no interest in him and I was naively oblivious to his agenda. There were other boys closer to my age that I had more of an interest in, but he was patient and persistent. He took the big brother approach for a while in the beginning, being my friend, teaching me things, hanging at my house and helping out, like with the lawnmower, socializing with Mabel, having coffee and strawberries, hanging out with me and my girlfriends at the beach, driving us around in the back of his ranchero. He and his friends took us to parties we were too young to attend, and he took me to music venues and jam sessions and introduced me to some great music. And he even gave us weed and hash on occasion. Although I never got big into drugs or alcohol throughout my life, these things were easily accessible and part of the scene in the 70s. He began to become protective over me, and after a while, after time, he became protective over me, and I had never had anyone be protected over me in my life. No one had really cared enough to want to protect me from anything. That was all new to me, and it initially took on the feeling at the onset that someone actually cared if I was okay. Admittedly, I had huge cracks in my emotional development. Huge. I was, for all intents and purposes, a child from a dysfunctional, broken home with broken parents. As young as I was, I could feel these emotional cracks within my body because I was a sensitive and an empath. They felt like a deep ache inside of me as they literally throbbed in my solar plexus. It felt as if I had a big, empty hole in the core of my body that desperately ached to be filled. And in truth, I spent much of my life trying to fill that hole and quell that ache. But as a young teenager, all I knew was that I was longing to feel secure within a family unit that loved me and cared about me. And I was longing for a spiritual connection that went beyond the hypocritical organized religions I was raised with. I was also longing for relief from the responsibility and pressures I had from the dysfunction within my own home. I wanted what most children want, I suppose, but it was elusive, which made it more of a fantasy. It was a fantasy. And little Beta looked for ways to fill these unconscious gaps. But I don't even know if he knew consciously if that's what he was trying to do, fill the gaps. Maybe. He seemed more intent upon finding ways to bring me under his wing, under his control, and win me over. And I suspect he did what most guys would have done given the goal. He began by buying me things, something no one had ever done for me before. He started by buying me my own stereo. My own stereo. That was huge. I enjoyed that stereo immensely as I played albums in my room while doing my homework every night. But after the stereo came the clothing. Bras and underwear were first, since he quickly learned I didn't have any of my own. As I mentioned in part one, I did 3 to 4 loads of laundry most days. And when I folded that laundry, I didn't take it up to anyone's bedroom or put it away in a dresser. We had a large dining table, Formica dining table, in front of the machines in the garage. And each person had a big tub with their name on it. After folding the clothes, I would put everyone's clothes in their bucket and they'd have to come down and get their own stuff. No one had their own underwear or socks or bras, however. The underwear had its own tub, as did the socks and the bras. Whoever got to rummage through the underwear bucket first got the better pairs to wear. And since I did the laundry, I usually got first choice. Sister number two is notorious for ending up with the holy pairs and the worst pairs of underwear from the bottom of the bucket because she didn't care what her underwear looked like. We laughed about that for years down the road. because her underwear was known at times to look like used paint rags, because our mother had a habit of grabbing anything in her path when she was in the middle of a paint project. The underwear often got grabbed. So much for the sound advice that I'd hear almost every mother I knew back then say to my girlfriends whenever they left the house. They would say, be sure you're wearing clean underwear in case you get run over by a truck or fall out of a tree and have to go to the hospital. That's what they used to say. My mother never said that to me, but I heard it all the time. Okay, I think I will end part two here and continue on with part three next week. The plot thickens. So, in conclusion, and for whatever it's worth, this is my little protest against his story. This is me telling my story my way for the record. It's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I would love to hear your stories as well, so please feel free to share your stories in the comments. Until next time, be well, choose love, and thank you. Thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.